engaged by points bet. Right, gotcha. How was
It
that?
was amazing.
Yeah, they're good guys.
That dude's got my back like nobody.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my best friends, Johnny. We go back a long way. We've owned a business together. I was an inch away from joining PointsBet. I was about to be like their first employee, and then we were sort of, I don't know, I think we were happy to sort of settle in Melbourne, and we just got married, about to have kids, and I avoided a crazy journey.
It was a crazy journey for him. I thought he did a tremendous job. It sucked.
Yeah.
Because I had a year left with them when he left, and
right.
And I loved that job. I loved it.
Were you full time?
Yeah, I had my own TV show with him.
Right.
I was like the ambassador for all of college and NFL football.
Yeah.
Had my own show, and we were doing really good things. Like we were getting a lot of attention, and so hopefully us being kind of as good as we were those 2 years helped him sell it for more money.
Yeah, I think Johnny just bought a nice house around the corner, so he's done okay, and now he's got 3 kids, and I think he's enjoying having a bit of time off. And
he was hustling for a while there.
I think he's challenged now. He's looking at a few different opportunities to get back into it, and he's like, "Oh, I just don't know if I've got the motivation to do what I want to do again."
Yeah, I get that.
And was that sort of your first venture back into the media space, or not first, but a significant one for you?
Yeah, I mean, no, actually, it kind of came out of nowhere. I was doing a little stuff with, the conference of my college and ESPN and some Sirius XM radio and things like that.
Yeah.
But this was my first stop where somebody looked at me and said, "You're awesome.
Yeah.
Let's build something together.
Yeah.
And go do it."
Yeah.
And I just look for that like nobody else's business. I want like this loyalty. I want you to have my back. And Liam Rockline, who was the head of content for PointsBet that Johnny had hired, tapped me. Yeah. And, we went to work like right away, and we made it into something really special.
Yeah, interesting. I guess, we'll get into this in the conversation, but a key part of your career arc, you had everyone telling you were awesome, and then everyone telling you the opposite, and now then you're back, but with a bit more humility this time.
Yeah.
And experience.
Yeah, it's weird for for about 6 months between the end of your season until the NFL draft, where everybody who you think has any sort of say in anything tells you you're the best football player in the world.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over again. At some point, you start to believe them.
Yeah.
And with somebody who had a pretty sizable ego going into it, that inflated it even more, kind of took it to out of control space. And and it's funny to see how everybody loves you until everybody hates you. And then you're just like,
yeah. And then you got to start believing the same guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
You believed them when they told you you're good.
Yeah. My dad told me a long time ago, like, if you believe all the good stuff that you hear about, you got to believe all the bad stuff. So you just don't believe any of it. And I think I got lost in that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's just, no one expects to become, this football god. You love the game. I love playing all sports. I really enjoyed basketball. I really enjoyed football, baseball, golf, track and field.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. I loved to compete.
Yeah.
So that's what I was always searching for. And the perks that came along with it, all the money and the power and the prestige, that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but when it came along, I was like, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take that too.
Yeah. Interesting. So Brian, thanks for coming on, mate. And we'll circle back to that and your crazy journey that you've had to get here. But now you're a guy in your mid-40s and you got 2 kids, and you look back on a crazy roller coaster of a life. As you sit here today and I ask the question, what's the point anyway? How are you answering that?
I'm answering, what's the point? If the point is that the four of us,
Mm.
that's all that matters.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't have kids before I figured that out.
Yeah.
So I wake up every day and choose to be gloriously happy.
Mm-hmm.
No one, and I mean no one, can take that away from me.
Yeah.
Ever. That's the point.
Yeah.
I understand the things I can control.
Yeah.
My attitude, my behavior, and my effort.
Yeah.
Those are the only three things I can control. I can't control what anybody else thinks, says. And so I wake up and I choose to be gloriously happy. And I look next to me and there's my wife. And I know with the little, technology these days, the two monitors sitting next to the bed with the two kids
We got the same ones.
Two kids sleeping, peacefully. I'm like, what else could you ask for? What else is the point to all this? And so then everything I do from that point on, when I wake up until I put my head back down again, is about serving others and making it for my family. And what's ironic about it is when you make it about somebody else, your life usually gets better.
Yeah.
And that was not how I thought it had to go as the narcissist, growing up, where it was like, to make my life better, everything had to be about me, or what I got out of it, or everything, what you could give me.
Yeah.
And so that's been a shift. At 48 years old, playing football is a lifetime ago. What's the point is what I just told you, what I get to do every morning.
Awesome. Have you thought about the philosophy around all of that? Like why it is that focusing on others and having a what's the point being your family, the four of you, is so much more fulfilling than individually? Like I noticed you spoke about the things you control. It sounds quite stoic to me, and that's probably, I've certainly delved into stoicism and the circle of control and the circle of influence, and there are things outside of that you can't control. Where are you at in terms of how you think about these things philosophically?
Yeah, I don't probably delve too deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that there's, I'm not religious per se. I have more of a spirituality aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a God and I'm not it.
Yeah.
Is the simplest way for me to break it down. Otherwise, I probably shouldn't or wouldn't be here right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be something bigger than me guiding that. And I let it, I don't try to understand it, why necessarily something works. I just do it. In these last 10 years, and that's where I think the line of demarcation for me is, the last 10 years, that's been the answer. And it's funny to think with, like, life is life, and life is hard, and life isn't fair. It's really about how you deal with it that matters. And so regardless of any sort of stressors or disappointments or things like that crop up now, I have a perspective that's different than most others. And so I just kind of go, it could be worse. And if it could be worse, then I've got it better than anybody right now, And so I tend to just look at it that way. And it's a mindset thing. It really is. It's a choice on how to do it, because you can get bogged down in things that could be bothering you, and disappointments, because those still exist, and judgments of others and things like that. But again, if you realistically look at what I talked about, and the things that I can't control any of that stuff.
Mm.
And since I can't control that stuff, it is absolutely pointless to even have a think about it.
Mm.
It really is. Let's go do something positive. Let's put all our effort into doing whatever we can in this moment. Have a good attitude, which results usually in good behavior with that. And it just clicks. It keeps going. You and I just talked about this real cool job I had with PointsBet.
Yeah.
Working with your friend Johnny Aiken, and I loved it. It kind of came out of nowhere. It gave me and my family everything. It moved us to the East Coast, where we got much more land for our kids to run. And it set us up. And I don't know if Johnny fully realizes that.
Yeah.
I've told him, but I don't think he may fully understand what it meant to our family and everything like that. So, but that ended, and I was incredibly disappointed, right?
Yeah.
Even the new company that bought it, like, I had a year left on my contract, and they chose to buy me out of the contract rather than have me just keep doing my show. And I was just like, well, you're paying me.
Yeah.
I really like doing the show. I do a really good job at it. Let's just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And they're just like, nah, they wanted the licensing. And so I was really kind of disappointed and distraught. And instead of focusing on that, what I focused on was I was home for the first 9 months of my baby girl's life.
Yeah.
And I wasn't for my sons because I was out there hustling,
Yeah.
really trying to support the family and everything like that. So I was home like every day she saw my face, whether that was me getting her up, feeding her at night, whatever it was. I couldn't do my show, but I was with her, every single day. So it ended up having it's really how you choose to
Your
walk through it,
Yeah. Yeah.
to behave, and how the attitude follows and the effort you put into it. And and now, now she's, she's got me wrapped around her little finger, but I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. Has that been losing that PointsBet job? Like you're essentially 10 years into this sort of transformation and new way of looking at life. Is that the first major challenge that's come up in that period where you've had to implement this new worldview and perspective on life? Or have there been other big challenges?
I mean, anytime there's like something really big where it's like a job and like financial to the family and everything like that. So it seems like the bigger of the things. But for me, the practice of it on some of the simplest things is what allows for something like that big happens, for you to walk through it in that way. So, whatever that's looked like, first off, early on, it was, well, your listeners have no idea really. So I spent 3 years in prison. So when I walked out, the morning afterwards, I woke up in a real bed, so I was really grateful for.
Mm.
I was living at my mom and dad's house as a 38-year-old man who was once a millionaire football player. Living in your parents' house after just walking out of prison, your ego is not in the greatest of places. But I was grateful. I had slept in a good bed. I was, home, and I woke up, and the next morning in my hometown newspaper, there was a cartoon, and it was a goofy kind of picture of me.
Yeah.
But the blurb said, "Lock up your medicine cabinets. Ryan leaves out." In my hometown newspaper.
Yeah.
And then my immediate reaction in that moment was like, oh yeah. How did I forget that this is how everybody views me? This is what it's going to be like the rest of my life. What's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, so there was a real come to Jesus moment in that. My first reaction as a recovering drug addict, and the reason why I was in prison, was to find that drug of choice and numb myself. I don't want to feel this way.
Yeah.
I hate feeling this way. I never want to feel this way again. And so that was my first initial reaction. And instead, I went down to the homeless shelter and I started to volunteer there. And I would sit down and just listen to the guys or gals talk to me. And I didn't feel like I really did anything big.
Yeah.
Most of the time I just listened to them. And these are individuals that just don't feel seen, don't feel heard. Yeah, and they just don't feel seen or heard, and that's all I really did. And I could see them get better. And then also I was like, one of the guys who was homeless, like, I had perspective. I'm like, he doesn't have a place to sleep tonight. I have a bed to lay my head down. Like, so you started to have kind of perspective around this stuff. So what? Your newstown newspaper, your hometown newspaper made fun of you.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to be like that. You got to walk through it, find a way to walk through it and do something different. So that was the first real start. And that was the day after I got out. Yeah. And there's been many of those moments along the way. So, and I think it's prepared me really well for when that, kind of job of my life disappeared, to understand it and feel the disappointment that I was having. I liked the people I worked with. I loved working for Johnny. especially because he just, like I said to you before, the dude's just he had my back, like through everything. And when you find true loyalty for somebody who didn't owe me anything, like he'd never met me before, that disappointment was real. So I had to figure out a way to walk through it in a positive and healthy way. And I've tried to do that. I've tried to do that on and kept climbing and doing the things I love to do. But, he gave me a real opportunity, and that also showcases with content that, other people can look at now and go, oh, this guy can carry his own show. He's really good at handicapping NFL and college football. And so that's opened some doors for me there in other places too. But I think it just goes to show what happened on day 2 is the same way you deal with it on day, year 10.
Yeah.
If you do it in a healthy, positive way, usually you get a positive result from it.
Yeah. What was the turning point, Ryan? So it was, my understanding, probably it was whilst you were in prison that you start to have this shift?
Well, yeah, for like 26 of the 32 months I was incarcerated, like nothing changed. You wouldn't even recognize me. I was like, had a beard down to my chest, hair down to my nose. Was like 325 pounds. I don't know what that is in
160, 150
kilograms.
160 kilos. It's a big boy.
Yeah. I was a big boy, 6'7", 325 pounds, angry all the time.
Yeah.
And not really moving towards any sort of answer. And my roommate, who was a Iraqi Afghan army veteran, kind of confronted me one day in my cell and told me how much of value I was to not only the other inmates, but for when I got out. That I had my head buried in the sand. And then he suggested we go down to the prison library and help prisoners learn how to read who didn't know how to read.
Yeah.
So that would be the first. Now, I've had many of those opportunities in my life, coaches and mentors and people who've tried to right the ship for me. So I can't tell you why in this moment I actually kind of listened, maybe because the substance that I was addicted to, which was opiate painkillers, hadn't been in my system for 26 months.
Yeah.
And so my head was at least a little clearer to the idea, but I was still really like childish and in my attempt, walking down the hallway to the library for the first time, thinking this is stupid, this isn't going to help me. And like, doesn't he know how important I am?
Yeah.
The guy in the red jumpsuit in a prison still thinks he's important is the problem with that line. So I walked into this room and there was these, middle-aged men in a place where you're supposed to, not show any kind of transparency or vulnerability because that can get you hurt or taken advantage of. And a guy came up and asked me for help. Yeah. Never had learned how to read, had faked it his whole life. And that's where it started. Now, I listen, I'd love to tell you that this was the epiphany. Yeah. But you don't realize it while it's happening.
In retrospect, it makes more sense.
Yeah. You can look back on it and go, okay, that was a turning point when you started to figure that out. And so where I did start to notice, it was probably, and listen, if I didn't go back, like nothing would have changed. Like there's a consistency to this process too, right? You have to be consistent with it. You have to show up. I liken it to going to the gym. You don't go to the gym one day and the next day you wake up and look like The Rock. You have to put in the effort. Or Australian for you guys, you don't wake up and look like Chris Hemsworth, as Thor. And so, I just kept coming back. And a month or so passed, and I realized I was sleeping better. I was more personable, and I was actually talking to my family. And those were 3 things that I hadn't probably done in a decade. And so that was the shift, and that was the change that I understood. It was I was being of service to another human being for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
And so that shifted. So I knew when I got out, that was going to have to be the foundation of it all, or nothing would change. Most likely I'd be back or dead, actually. And so that I can look back now and go, okay, that's it. But the reason why we're talking now, 10 years later, is because I've followed up with that. Yeah. That's been the the true north of everything over the last 10 years is, be of service to another human being. Remove yourself from the equation, and things tend to work out pretty well for me. And so that was the turning point I can look back on and I'll go, okay, that was it. Yeah. Didn't know it, but I know it now.
Yeah. How much longer were you in prison after that point?
6 months.
Yeah, okay. So to give you a bit of a period.
It was really those final 6 months out of the 32.
Yeah.
It allowed me, because I kept denying my parole. I could have been out after 9 months.
Yeah.
And I kept denying it because I was so miserable.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was some sort of control I had. Yeah, like I'm deciding not to get out.
Yeah.
And so, as soon as I kind of gave up the control of anything, when my parole came up, I didn't deny it. And they granted me it immediately, I was in there for 32 months. I've spent about 10 years and 4 months now outside those walls. And I ended up kind of getting the life of my dreams because of it. So it's odd.
Yeah.
Thought football was going to be the reason why I would get the life of my dreams, but turns out it was a nasty drug habit and going to prison.
Yeah.
So who would have figured?
Exactly. I mean, it's a consistent story through history and through people's experiences that we learn so much about ourselves, and most of the good comes through the suffering, which is sort of paradoxical to what we would think, which makes me want to sort of circle back a little bit, 20 years earlier. We've spoken about your journey afterwards, and, there's people listening to this that will know you well, and there's people who will be like, never heard of this guy, but I love his perspective on life. In your early 20s, you're a football star, and you're spoken of about who's going to go pick one in the draft, you or Peyton Manning. Now, if I'm in my early 20s doing this podcast, I'm probably thinking, hey, I'd love to get Peyton Manning on the show, Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or these stars. Now that I'm a bit older, I'm like, I'd much rather chat to Ryan Leaf, because I love hearing about the sufferings and how that makes people and how that creates such a better answer on what's the point anyway. I love hearing the people that have sort of been to the bottom and got back out of it. Do you want to give a bit of an overview of what your life was like from the so-called peaks in your late teens, early 20s to how you ended up?
Since I was that guy?
That guy, yeah.
Since I was that guy? They made little action figures of me. That's how crazy big I was, right? I mean, I was never supposed to make it there. Well, I'm from a really, really small town in Montana, which is a state in the United States, and no one's ever from the state of Montana been drafted in the first round of the NFL draft until me.
Yeah, right.
And there hasn't been anyone since after me. There's more, to your point, there's more first round draft picks in the Manning family than the whole state of Montana where I grew up. So I was never supposed to get there. And then when I did, it was almost like everybody was so flippant about, oh, he's just so talented. It was easy for him, and not understanding how darn hard it was to get where I got.
Yeah.
There's a chip you wear on your shoulder. Everybody does to help fuel that. You talked about having guys on the show, having Peyton on or Tom on. Listen, my final game in college was against Michigan and Tom Brady, and he couldn't even get on the football field.
Yeah, right.
In the Rose Bowl. I was probably the better quarterback than Peyton Manning coming out into the draft. More talented, did more with less.
Yeah.
In college, and so all of that was true. In what you've seen with Peyton and Tom is they've invented suffering in some ways for themselves, right? They've gone through different kind of things. The comeback from the neck in Peyton's scenario, Indianapolis giving up on him going to win a championship. Tom being picked in the 6th round, and everybody thought he could do it, and continuing to try to improve every single year to get better and become one of the greatest to ever play the game. Like all those things, you create that. There's a chip on your shoulder that you wear, and I had it. And it fueled me and it pushed me to limits that I didn't think I could ever, achieve. Getting out of Montana, going to a Division I college, the highest level, playing for a championship, being a Heisman Trophy finalist, number 1 or number 2 pick in the NFL draft. All of those things. The thing about a chip is, if it fuels you in a way with the negativity, it can have a good outcome. But if it just absolutely swallows you whole, almost like a black hole, that negativity, it can take everything else with it. There has to be a point where that chip becomes, absolved.
Yeah.
Of you used it for what you needed to use it for. There's no benefit to it anymore. Find another one.
Yeah.
Or find a way to fuel it in a different kind of positivity or goal setting.
Yeah.
Instead, I was still just constantly driven by the fact that, my upbringing in my hometown and my home state they weren't very kind to me as a kid. I get it as an adult, and me ending up back in that state and victimizing the state as a criminal and everything like that. But I could never get over how they could treat a kid the way they treated me. I wasn't what they wanted. They wanted kind of a blue collar conservative. I grew up in the era of the Fab Five in Michigan, the 5 freshman basketball players.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, really Kobe Bryant at the beginning of his career. And so those were my heroes, and I had a shaved head and earrings and black socks and shorts down to my knees. And, my hometown and my home state always wanted a professional athlete. And instead they got me, is what it turned out to be. And so there was a lot of shame there, and shame, really builds that chip. And so for me, when I got to the highest level, that chip could consume me. The negativity consumed me. And then when others turned on me because of poor play, I immediately was back to being that child again and dealing with it in the way I'd always dealt with it, really defensively. I don't need your help. I'll take care of it. But at the highest possible level of professional sports, the quarterback position, you can't be going up against everybody, the defenses, the media, the teammates, everybody, family. Your central nervous system is just on tilt, and you cannot be successful at that level. And I just thought I could be. And when I couldn't, instead of saying, I'm really struggling here, I need some help from somebody, I just quit after 4 years in something that I wanted to do my whole life, from, being this guy to 4 years later being out of the league to literally 5 years later being in a prison cell.
Yeah.
So, it's just the irony in all of it and how quickly one can dissolve into another is, I think, very, very appropriate for everybody out there watching to know that, it can turn like that.
Yeah.
If you're not making, the positive and healthy choices. You're going to make negative and toxic ones all the time, but if you can be self-aware and understand when it happens, or when somebody shows you the mirror, and that was always a problem for me, is when somebody would show me the mirror, I'd see the old version of me.
Yeah.
And that would bother me so much that I would burn it all to the ground. And I think that's a way for a lot of people who deal with things. It's almost a natural act for a human being to be defensive, to be defiant, to try to fight back, rather than to really kind of take a look at it, maybe have some perspective, and maybe try to adjust it or evolve in a positive and healthy way. That's just, it sounds like the simple reason. And in the abstract, when you're behind everything and you're looking back on stuff, you can look at it and go, oh yeah, that would have been the answer. That seems really easy. Why couldn't I?
Yeah.
So the earlier we can be taught that, I think it goes a long way. And that's what I'm trying to do with my 7-year-old right now. Like those 3 things that I talked about in control, the behavior, the attitude, the effort, like that is a constant with me and him, knowing that every moment, every opportunity, every fork in the road, when something happens, he has a choice to deal with it in a healthy, positive way, or negative and toxic one. And unfortunately, the negative and toxic one comes with consequences, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And sometimes those consequences are going to be brutal. In my case, they were brutal at times. And you hope that it doesn't take those brutal types of consequences to make you take a real honest look at those things you can control. And so, the 48-year-old dad and the 7-year-old son are trying to navigate that, 10 years removed. So I'm kind of 10 years old myself and he's 7. So we're kind of in this together.
Do you see personality traits in your son that are similar to you as a kid?
Yeah, I do. I see there's a real competitive streak to him, and losing, there's an emotional reaction to it, which I think is fine to a point. Like I think it shows how hard you want to. I always looked at guys who didn't take losing as badly as like something was wrong with them, And clearly it had its effects on me. It worked, right? It got me to the highest possible level of
I
competition
mean,
you can get to.
that's what I was going to say. It's like you have these personality traits. I mean, being a brash, arrogant, super self-confident guy might not be great for your people around you, but in a lot of in a lot of instances, they're crucial elements of success of a sports star. What we,
They
yeah,
definitely are.
yeah, and you seem to have got. I mean, from the outside looking in, it sort of seems like you reach those peaks. Then you get drafted pick two, first two games you starter, you have wins, and then I've heard you speak about on other podcasts. And your third game, Kansas City, the wheels completely fell off, and it seems like that's you just never came back from that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it's so odd to think that one game, but it's not one game.
Yeah, it
How
highlighted
I
what it was already there, almost maybe.
It was how I dealt with it.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't deal with it in a healthy way.
Mm.
And that just continued to, like, if I would have stood up to the microphone the day after and said, I mean, I had every excuse in the book. I was in the hospital all week with a staph infection.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't have played the game. It was a monsoon rainstorm. It was a horrible game to play in. It was just humiliating and embarrassing. To think about it, I don't know if I've ever had a bad game in my life. It was a bad game. It's a horrible game. There was so much like humiliation and embarrassment. And I had every out, every excuse in the book, like all those things, your rookie moment, like it's there. Instead, I imploded on a cameraman. It got reported in the press. I yelled at the reporter about showing everybody what a petulant child I am when he was just doing his job. I mean, everything. I could give you a blueprint of how not to deal with a situation. Ironically enough, I started a company a few years back where we do a lot of consulting and in crisis management, because when I watch people walk through what I did, I almost view it, how can they possibly do that?
Yeah.
I know how they can because I did it, but it's such an easy fix. If I stepped in front of the microphone the day after the game and said, that will never happen again. I will work my tail off so something like that would never happen again. I'm embarrassed. I'm humiliated. That's on me. I'm going to go fix it. That is not hard to do. In the moment, as a 22-year-old brash millionaire that's being judged by everybody, it was really hard.
Yeah.
Because people were telling me to do that. And I just was like,
didn't want to hear it.
Oh, man, it's so crazy to think that you are at the elite level of your profession, but you cannot function on the level of like a 7-year-old when it comes to emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. And I've studied it and I've tried to understand more about it. And I think it's made me really good at what I do now. But yeah, it's fascinating to me to see people willing to burn everything down because of the stereotype or stigma that surrounds the idea of mental health or vulnerability, accountability, those types of things.
Yeah. How much do you think, and also, factoring in the fact that you said your son is similar to you, what was your upbringing like, and how much of it do you think is nurture versus nature that led you to being the position that you were when you're in your early 20s?
Yeah, listen, I'm the first child of our family's generation of grandchildren. Mom and dad, first child, dad's a 2-tour Vietnam veteran, came home, was spit on, raised 3 kids, built a marriage, a business, just built on character and integrity, my father.
Yeah.
Mom's a registered nurse, delivered babies, middle of the night, her whole life, like helping people, was the caretaker of 4 other sisters and kind of my mom, my grandma, so like, you're not a product of your environment. I don't buy too much into that. Otherwise I wouldn't end up in a prison cell. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But I do get what families do in the vein of protecting or believing they're protecting. My grandfather, my mom's father, was an alcoholic, but he was a really well-known businessman and pillar in the community. So he was in the public eye. And a lot of times, some of those public eye moments were embarrassing to the family when someone has an alcohol problem. And my mom was always trying to cover up for it and things like that. So there was a lot of shame with that. And I think she saw a bit of him in me early on. Mm-hmm. And she was really frightened for everybody else to see it. And so she tried to guard against that. And there was a lot of shaming that went on, not only publicly with my community, but I felt like it started to play out at home. Like I was kind of told I was bad rather than I did a bad thing or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where I was kind of taught to hide or lie and keep everything secret. And so yeah, I think there's a nurture value to that, like most things, you're not born with the mindset that someone's different, which makes them worse or less than. It's a taught thing. And so I think there was something to that. And so my wife and I still see it creep up in me sometimes and how I handle stuff. Usually when my wife asks me questions, I hear it as confrontational as to why I messed up, rather than her just asking a question to be educated or to be informed. No judgment in the accusation. It was just a real question, like, why did you go to the store after this? That's not an accusation because you're lying to her or covering something up. It was just a question.
Yeah.
And so I've worked on that a lot. Early in our relationship, it was, I had to really work on the fact that she's not shaming you. She's not saying you're bad. She's just wanting to be informed about something. And that's taken a lot of work. But that's usually how I hear it when somebody is what I think is critical, which may just be, I hear it as judgment and shame. And that's how I usually react to it, defensively, angrily, and over the top. So that's something I've had to work on a ton over the last 10 years. And it's still, still something I have to deal with better.
Yeah. How did you go right from, because it's interesting, I know there's a story, when you got drafted, you went to Vegas for the night, and people knowing that you ended up a drug addict and you ended up in prison, that might have just been you the whole time. But I've heard you say, like, you can't blame your career on your drug addiction because that didn't start till later, and you actually weren't really ever a binge drinker or into any other drugs whatsoever. How did that happen? How did you go from finishing the game to ending up addicted to drugs when you hadn't been addicted or used substances before?
Well, I tell people I was a drug addict long before I ever took a drug.
Yeah.
And I think that points to it. In that competition was my first drug of choice.
Yeah.
Flat out. And so when that went away, when I left football, there was nothing to really fill that void. And there was a lot of shame and there was a lot of, judgment from others. And so we were in Vegas one night for a fight. I think it was a Mike Tyson fight, actually. And it's the closest I could get to of what a game day felt like adrenaline in the room, just kind of, the atmosphere. But usually when I went to that, there was a quid pro quo with our host. They would give you these really good seats, like ringside, and they would usually announce your name in the audience and stuff like that. And there's a trade-off there because I didn't like what came. Usually what came with it was booze or something like that with me.
Yeah.
But as a narcissist...
How far out of the game were you at this point?
I would argue about 4 or 5 months.
Okay, so fairly recently out.
Yeah, very recently. It was during the season that I would be playing at that moment. So there had to have been a void filled of what that was. And so I was at this fight and they were announcing celebrities in the audience, and they were announcing like Dr. Dre and Tiger Woods and Charles Barkley. Place went berserk and they announced my name, and it just exactly what I expected to happen. Everybody booed and hissed. And it's not like that hadn't happened before. I mean, when you play and you walk into an opposing team stadium,
pretty standard.
That happens, but you're wearing armor.
Yeah,
you got a helmet on, shoulder pads, and you might have a say in deflecting that. You could go out and play really well and shut them all up. Like there's nothing now. So my addict brain, as I said, I was an addict long before I ever took a drug. My addict brain heard, not only are you a terrible football player, but you're a horrible human being. That's just how I kind of interpret it.
Yeah.
We would go to, we'd walk into some parties that night after the fight where there were Super Bowl champions and Hall of Famers, where I always felt less than and judged, scared.
Yeah.
But I'm also a narcissist, so I'm also want to show up and show everybody that I'm still rich and famous and everything's fine, you know. An acquaintance of mine who was in there offered me some Vicodin. Now, I knew what Vicodin was. I've had 15 surgeries playing pro sports orthopedically, and I was given this opiate painkiller after every single one for the acute physical pain, and it worked. The drug's made for a reason, right?
Yeah.
It does the job it's supposed to. But I'd always quit taking them and start rehabbing and get back to competing. Well, and that was for physical pain. I was in emotional pain. He offered me a couple Vicodin. I mixed it with the alcohol I was drinking that night, and I would walk in and out of those rooms, those parties, and not feel any of that judgment or fear or less than. Like, the drug works for me. I've never taken any other drug in my life. I smoked weed one time when I was in Amsterdam because when you're in Amsterdam, that's what you do. I didn't like it. I've never tried another drug in my life except an opiate painkiller that was been given to me by a doctor.
Yeah, wow.
And it worked. You know, I didn't feel any of that emotional pain. I didn't feel anything. And I think that's what I was searching for so long, not to feel anything. None of any of that shame, guilt, fear, less than, all of it. And so I had my answer. And that would be the next 8 years, chasing that feeling of not feeling anything. 8 years of it. And when you go from making $5 million a year to making zero because you quit, spending the money, still pretending like you have this lifestyle so everybody thinks everything's fine, that goes away in a hurry. The doctors that you would go to and manipulate for the medicine, they figure it out. And before you know it, I'm back in my hometown where I'm supposed to be the hero. Instead, I'm broke, living in a 1-bedroom, little in-laws house back by the alley, waking up every morning, asking myself, do I have pills? And if I don't, how do I get them? And that was my life. And that's so crazy to think. And that I was like, this is my life now. This is just how it is. And so you become a criminal. You start going to friends' houses, pretending you're stopping by to say hi, excuse yourself to the medicine cabinet. Ultimately, I was going to open houses, and then I just flat out started, breaking and entering, knocking on doors. If no one answered, I'd feel the door handle. If it was unlocked, I'd let myself in. And ironically enough, kind of during that time period where no one really had talked about the epidemic of opiate painkillers, 9 times out of 10, you had some sort of...
Yeah.
And so...
Could you get them on the... was there a black market for opiates, or was it...
There was. You could order them online. There was like a black market kind of pill mill through Florida. There was a lot of pill mills in Florida. And that's what ultimately got me caught, because I would order them COD because I was so fearful that I was going to get fleeced. They were going to send me bad stuff, that I would wait till they got delivered, and I would give the postman like a money order. Well, apparently our postman only gets like, I don't know, 1 or 2 CODs a month normally, and I was getting like 1 or 2 CODs a week. And so he turned me into the drug task force, and that's what I ultimately got pulled in on. And they ended up saving my life, ironically enough. So they deserve a lot of credit for this turnaround, because they're the ones that kickstarted it for me.
Yeah. How was it? How did you go getting off the drugs? Was once you're in prison, you literally just don't have a choice, and you got to go.
Yeah, man. I mean, first 83 days while I was locked up, I was in solitaire.
Right.
Because it was supposed to be for my own good. They were worried that someone was going to try to hurt me because I was famous, and that never was the case. People just wanted to know me and wanted to hear stories. Like, no one ever wanted to hurt me.
Yeah.
But anyway, first 83 days inside, I was in solitary, and like the last place anybody should ever be is in my brain, coming off drugs for 83 days. Yeah. I mean, it is as chaotic as that may sound, is what it is. And so, yeah, it was just, cold turkey in a, 8 by 10 cell, just sweating it out, coming off it, miserable, the things that what withdrawal feels like. At some point, you get past that point and gradually, start building it back up. And then, I didn't see freedom again for 32 months. So when I walked out of there, it really showcased what the real problem was. And it was me.
Yeah.
The drugs hadn't been around for 32 months, but I looked worse, felt worse, thought worse. I was 325 pounds, about to stroke out from high blood pressure. Like it clearly pointed to the drugs were just a symptom.
Yeah.
Of the bigger issue, which was me. And so you better fix you. And if you don't fix you, it really won't matter what the symptom is. It can be food, it can be drugs, alcohol, sex, self-harm, whatever that looks like. There's so many adaptations to that.
If there's a problem there, you'll manifest a way to make it worse. Did you go through? I've heard you talk about higher power, which I know we've spoken a lot in sort of that's through the AA programs. Did you go through any sort of structured programs to build your way out of this, or was it all just yourself?
No, AA has been a huge part of it.
Yeah,
that fellowship is just the guidance. Mainly, it's early on. It was my higher power, because you're looking for whatever God is. And I remember a guy telling me that God was an acronym.
Mm-hmm.
It was GOD, group of drunks. And I like that. Like if I had a problem, I went to them. Yeah. I went to the people that had been through what I'd been through, overcame it, and found a way to live a peaceful, unchaotic life. And that's all I was searching for.
Yeah.
And so that was the answer. So for the longest time, that was my higher power. Since then, it's become nature, just, the ocean, these things that are just so much greater than me. If you want to feel small or understand how small you are, go walk out in the ocean up to your knees and look around.
Yeah.
And see the movement and see how quickly your life can be tossed aside by this nature that exists around you. And so that's kind of become and so I use golf in that a lot, because when you're playing golf, you're out in nature for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
And the trees and nature and everything like that. And that really kind of started to be the catalyst for me. Everybody always has, their religion and the way they want to bring it to you and everything like that. And I always am like, yeah, I get where you're coming from. That's what works for you. And that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. Keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing what works for me, because I don't know how this works. It just does. And I'm not gonna, upend the apple cart on this deal, right? Like, it's just, this works for me. I'm not harming myself. I'm not harming anybody else. I'm doing the best I can for my family and for other people. And I just, if it's not in the judgment of somebody else through a higher power that they choose to follow, that's not a me problem, right? That's a you problem.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah. Did you grow up with any sort of faith or belief,
Yeah, really brought up Catholic.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Catholicism's kind of forced on most people. Like, Sundays were for football for me, but church was at 11 every Sunday. We wouldn't get back till the first half was over, the first games, and the standing up and kneeling down and the forced, confessions and penance and first communion and being an altar boy. Like, all the stuff in Catholicism was, and I did it until I was 18. And when I went away to college, that was kind of it. For me, I didn't have time for it. Like, my mindset was to be a success, and everything I did went into that. I didn't see faith as
it was a hindrance more than.
I didn't see faith as a way for me to get to that. Yeah. Right. I felt like, it would take away from, if church is at 11 on a Sunday, I'm supposed to be in the weight room then. Lifting the Bible ain't going to be like lifting that bench bar. That's a different deal.
Yeah.
And I'm still I understand that and I simplify it as easy as I can. And I've said it to you earlier, I know there's a God and I'm not it, is the best way for me to put it. And kind of stolen all the good parts from every religion. I haven't, I read the entire Bible from front to back while I was in prison.
Did you?
I see the Bible as the first self-help book ever created. It's not a instruction manual, like a life instruction manual. It's a self-help book. It gives you the tools to deal with things in the best way possible, but you're going to have to make those choices. Mm-hmm. It's not an instruction manual because there's some stuff in there that's absolutely crazy. It's just nuts.
Well, it's funny. I'm Christian. I'm also an atheist until like 3 years ago, and get all my guests are sort of different. I've had heaps of people that have come through AA. Some have ended up Christian. Some have ended up New Age. Some have. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Oh yeah.
little man just walked in from. Whoa, are you okay? Yeah. Little man just walked in from school, and he just dumped it on the floor because his socks got slippery on the ground. Are you all right? You get your shoulder there like that? Okay. You want to say hi?
Hey, how are you? What's your name?
This is McGyver.
McGyver. Great to meet you.
The 7-year-old. Do you want to tell him what are the 3 things you can control?
Attitude, behavior, and effort.
Yeah.
Good one.
One, right?
And how was school?
Good job. How was school?
Good.
Yeah? What'd you learn?
We learned about... Yesterday we learned about Abraham Lincoln. And then after Abraham Lincoln, we learned about George Washington. And today we learned about Harriet
Tubman? Really?
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear more about it tonight.
Harriet Tubman was...
Oh, you're going to tell us about it now?
Born in 1820.
20?
Yeah.
That's super old.
Was Dad born then?
Was I born then?
No.
No.
He's not that old.
One. Not that old. All right, you going to go do some reading?
Yeah.
Okay, when I'm done, I'll come see you, okay? All right.
Good
Love
stuff,
you, bub.
McGyver. Good kid.
Thanks, Mama.
I was just saying, my big takeaway from reading the Bible is something that I think you've sort of essentially spoken about inadvertently through this, is just the flawed character of man, and how basically, there's no good man. I remember there was a little clip, Tucker Carlson was talking about it recently. He was saying he went and read the Bible start to finish. I love the way he spoke about it. He's like, you read all these sort of so-called heroes. He's like, Abraham's off selling his sister, and then, David's coming along. He's the great king, and he's an adulterer and a murderer. And he's like, so whereas most people struggle, I think a lot of people are put off from being raised super religious. I think that's a turn off for a lot of people. When you don't believe in it, it becomes useless. But a lot of people get put off by the idea that, no, like, I don't want anyone telling me that I'm flawed and I need a savior. And whereas you're fine, you've lived it. You know that more than anyone.
Yeah, it's we don't like to be shown the mirror.
Yeah.
As humans, we don't like to see our flaws. And we don't certainly like someone else showing them to us, who you may actually see the same flaws in, and you're going, you have the gall to talk to me about this. Look at you, and that's why you don't pass judgment on somebody else. You show them, this is what I'm seeing, take a look at it. And that's what like true friends and true people who care about you unconditionally do. And so, yeah, that's hard. And I think that's exactly it. I think what, what they were doing in writing the Bible, they were writing the stories of like the trials and tribulations, and they're showing you these people that are going through adversity, and watch them walk through it in a terrible way and have the consequences, and then dig themselves out of it to become the person they always wanted to become, and things like that. So I think the writing's been there forever. I think the examples have been there forever, and it's just we are so close-minded to the idea of like, hey, if I don't have to go through the crap of it all, then I'm not going to. I'm gonna walk through it with everything that I can. But what I think, and where you do learn the most from is you learn from the failings more than you learn from the successes. It's just plain and simple.
Definitely.
And when you look back on it all later years in life, you're going to go, if you've done it right, and if those people out there are judging you still or pointing their finger at you still, what you've done is you've failed more than they've ever tried.
Yeah.
And that's where the resolve happens. That is exactly who I am. I have failed so many more times than you have ever tried at anything in your life. Is the mindset that I go at when I find somebody who's confronted me on that thing, or being judgmental of my past, and I like that.
Yeah.
Like the fact that I understand that about me. I am the sum of all its parts. I'm not just this one thing that you think of. And whether you're not happy with the fact that I should be getting this chance and I found happiness from it,
Yeah.
I think that's the bigger piece in all this, is like, I can't do anything about that.
Yeah. So at the start, Ryan, your answer to what's the point was, the 4 and the 4 in your family that are there with you now. And you look back and, your football career didn't have a single thing to do with that. Maybe it did through the failures, but how long did it? I'm sure you had a period where you left where you were thinking, what could have been? What if I did this differently? How long did that, or maybe it didn't, but if that did, how long did that persist? And do you ever now look back and think about if things had gone differently, what life would have looked like?
Man, it happens in the shower all the time, right? I'm standing there, water's rolling over the back of my head, just thinking about, like, with the mindset I have right now,
100%,
when situational things happened back then, how if I would have taken the different path, right? What it would have looked like. Now, it's a very slippery slope. You can get rolling down a hill pretty quick on that one. I mean, how does that change you? Are you saying that I think this way then? So that means that I think it through really well that way? I don't think that. I don't believe for a second that if I wasn't taught the lesson that I was taught, that I would have been any different sort of person. So that's the slippery slope for me. Like, what I think would have happened if I would have taken a different path is that I would have just been I would have snuck by. Like, I would have just kind of snuck by and went on, had a crazy cool career like I had my whole life, 18, 20 years, couple Super Bowl wins. And I just kind of would be, a 48-year-old asshole with a couple Super Bowl rings. And I don't think anybody wants to be around that guy. Football is, it's an institution in this country, the United States, but it's a silly game that we get to play, a child's game that you get paid a lot of money for, and it derives a ton of importance in the eyes of so many people out there. And then if in the eyes of others that you don't have a lot of success in it, that you're a failure, I think really speaks to how big of a deal it is and how much I let that impact me. So yeah, I think about it, but listen, nothing's going to change. I know that you can't carry it through on what that would look like. I know this though. I know that I live in a ton of gratitude for having gone through what I did. I didn't think I'd ever be able to tell somebody that I was grateful for having spent 32 months in prison. I'm grateful for it. I don't recommend it, but I'm grateful for it, right? And so yeah, I'm here. Everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen, and I've been given everything that I was promised. And so that's the bottom line. And if I'm going to live to be 100, then I'm only halfway there.
Awesome. Well, it's been a hell of a journey, and I really appreciate the openness in which you've shared it with us, Ryan. I've learned a lot from you. He's such a great guy. I love hearing the stories about everything that's got you to this point.
I appreciate that. This is, you can't keep it unless you give it away. And I didn't know what that meant. And my mentor explained it to me, and he said, you can't keep this peaceful, unchaotic life unless you give it away. Give away your story. And it's going to help somebody, and that's all that matters.
Awesome, my friend. God bless you. All the best to your family. I'll let you spend the afternoon with yours, and I'll start the day with mine.
I love it. That's the way we're supposed to do it.